back to winning isn't easy. Multiple disabilities and residual functional capacity and your ERISA disability claim. A common question I get is, can I get long-term disability benefits if I have more than one medical condition? And the reality is that many people just don't stop working because of a single health issue. Instead, it's the combination of medical problems that make it impossible for them to keep up with their occupation. So maybe you have heart disease and chronic back pain. Maybe your fibromyalgia overlaps with migraines or fatigue. Each condition alone may not disable you, but when you put them all together, they can prevent you from doing your own or any occupation. Unfortunately, many people don't think about all their medical conditions when filing for disability. They might focus on the back problems, but overlook the heart condition. Or they may claim fibromyalgia, but they don't mention the anxiety, depression, or irritable bowel syndrome symptoms that come along with it. And that can ultimately weaken your case or potentially limit the amount of benefits you're eligible for. The truth is, you need to identify all the medical problems that contribute to your disability, both individually and in combination. Now, here's where the policy or plan matters. Some long-term disability policies or plans say, look, you can only be disabled from one medical condition at a time. Others don't specify, and they will allow multiple conditions to be considered together. Now, most disability carriers or plans, at least during the own occupation stage, is going to combine the effects of all of your conditions and consider that. However, I've found that things get a little bit trickier when the definition of disability shifts to any occupation. And that's when the insurance companies or plans often start picking apart whether your limitations are physical, whether they're mental, whether they fall under subjective category limitations, whether they fall under mental nervous policy limitations, whether in fact you are disabled on an objective basis based on the physical exam findings and diagnostic studies. So the cherry picking of medical conditions really starts at the any occupation stage. So how can you prove your case when you have multiple medical conditions? Well, I will tell you that I have a specific strategy, and that strategy starts with the attending physician statement forms that the disability carrier has your doctor fill out. Now, when you look at them, you'll see that they're pretty darn generic. And most of the time, they're not even actually relevant to the medical condition or conditions that are disabling you. I'm also a Social Security disability attorney, and I incorporate Social Security disability residual functional capacity forms into my ERISA and individual disability long-term claims. So I'm often asked, well, why is this so important and what's residual functional capacity? Residual functional capacity is what you can still do despite your health issues. So your residual functional capacity, RFC, may describe how long you can sit, stand, or walk, whether you can bend, stoop, or lift. If you have trouble using your hands, if you have trouble sitting, whether you need frequent breaks, how long you'd be off task, how often you would miss work, and any other factors that are relevant to your physical, cognitive, or psychological abilities as a result of your disability. Now, why is that important? Well, the disability carrier plan is going to compare your residual functional capacity form against the essential duties of your occupation. If your restrictions prevent you from performing the material and substantial duties of your occupation, you might meet the definition of disability. You need to understand that there is no uniform definition of own occupation. So that's why you've got to get your policy or plan out. It might be an inability to do one or more of the material and substantial duties of your occupation. It might be the inability to do the material and substantial duties of your occupation. It might be the inability to do your occupation as described in the Dictionary of Occupational Titles. So you need to understand what that definition of own occupation is, so that you can make sure that your residual functional capacity forms and the history you're giving your doctor matches up with the problems that you would be having and would prevent you from doing your own occupation duties as that's defined by the policy or plan. Now, guess what? The definition in a disability policy or plan will normally change after 2 years. And the standard becomes an inability to do any occupation. And quite frankly, that can include a consideration of your education and your prior work history and the skills you've learned. Rarely, if ever, does it take into consideration your age. In English, what an any occupation job is basically a sedentary job, one in which you are sitting, limited to lifting of 10 pounds, and you are using bilateral manual dexterity, in other words, your hands, to meet the pace and production requirements and potentially the wage requirements of your policy or plan. Now, here's the problem. Most doctors aren't trained to provide this kind of detail. They will fill out the APS forms, but as I said, I don't find that these forms often capture the full scope of the restrictions and limitations. Social Security disability attorneys have developed over 70 different residual functional capacity forms tailored to specific conditions. They, in my view, ask the right question. And so I'm always asking the doctor to complete the APS form and the residual functional capacity form. I think that that is powerful evidence of a person's inability to do their own or any occupation. But that's not the only factor here. Consistency is key. Your residual functional capacity forms is completed by your doctor have to line up with your medical records. So if your doctor's notes don't document your symptoms and limitations, the disability insurance carrier plans doctors will dismiss or even disagree with your physician's opinion about your functional abilities, your residual functional capacity. So you can see that it takes teamwork between you and your physician to get this right. You've got to understand what the definition is of occupation. You need to make sure you're giving your doctor a really good interval history of your symptoms and how those symptoms would impact your ability to function not only at home and at work. And that description needs to be addressed, or addressing, if you will, the material and substantial duties of your occupation, if that's the definition, or the inability to do an essential material and substantial duty. So you want to tailor your history to that definition, and you want to make sure that your physician understands the material and substantial duties, if that's the definition of occupation, so that when you're sitting down with them asking you to fill out the form, they understand what, in fact, the applicable definition of occupation is and disability. In other words, you don't want the doctor to fill out a form that ultimately, at the end of the day, says you can do your own occupation, even though it may not say that distinctly, but the way they fill out the form with the restrictions and limitations will lead the carrier plan's medical doctors to the conclusion that you can do your own occupation. And the same holds true when we get to the any occupation stage. It takes teamwork. Got it? Let's take a break.